And our students got a bit of a raw deal, didn't they, during COVID, losing out on face-to-face teaching for much of the academic year. But now there's more disruption to their studies, with lecturers at several of the North universities taking strike action over pay, workload and cuts to their pensions. A cocktail, they say, which is pushing staff to breaking point. Here's Fergus Hewison.
Wrench the gender pay gap! Wrench those workloads!
Working out, getting fit for the fight. But this is a serious business. These university staff are involved in a long-running industrial dispute.
And the last one, raise your profile and clamp down on wages.
It all centres on pay, conditions and pensions. Many staff claim the expansion in higher education in recent decades has brought a sharp deterioration in their living standards.
There is money in the sector. There's money in reserves to quite a significant degree, billions of pounds in reserves. It's a political choice what you do with that money. We say invest it in staff, and that means you are automatically investing in students.
The UCU union claims a 35% reduction in the value of pensions is being imposed that will leave members much worse off in retirement. It also says wages are down more than 25% in real terms in just over a decade. And the union complains about pay discrimination based on race, gender and disability, and the increasing use of insecure or zero-hours contracts in the sector.
They can negotiate with us meaningfully, and they can come to the table with a will to solve these disputes. It could be over. They should have been over before they started.
The strikes are taking place across the country, including at Newcastle, Northumbria, York and Durham universities in our region. Thousands of staff are either on the picket line or off work because of the industrial action, instead of teaching or helping students. But what do students make of all of this disruption? Because they're paying more than £9,000 a year for their university education.
You are listening to Newcastle Student Radio with me, Izzy Ellis. And Vicky.
Who better to speak to than student journalists who've reported on the strikes and whose education has been personally affected by the industrial action and the COVID crisis.
With COVID and the strikes and that, uni needs to fix this. Uni needs to give the staff, transformation in the way that they're paid and their pensions, but also the way students are being compensated after uni, because I don't think we've had about £27,000 worth of teaching in the past 3 years.
At what point do you realise that maybe strikes aren't really working and it's only really affecting the students at the end of the day, because we're not seeing the university responding to this basically, and we're the ones who are at the brunt of this, not getting the teaching of what we've paid for basically.
Why I have sympathy for lecturers is because I understand that the lecturers are just workers at the end of the day, and they're exerting their right to strike.
I really do feel for the lecturers, my dissertation supervisor, but all you're doing is making the students more frustrated, and there's no real change.
But it's not about staff versus students. The union is at pains to stress.
So students are stressed out because of tuition fees. We're stressed out because we're getting squeezed. And the people who are doing the squeezing are trying to pit one against another.
The strikes have been going on since 2018. These are staff at a rally held in Durham last year. And there's potentially more industrial action to come. But with no end in sight and the cost of living crisis set to get worse, neither side looks like they're going to give up soon.
Well, Fergus is here now. Fergus, we heard obviously from the students and the unions. What are universities saying?
Well, universities claim that the strikes haven't been well supported and aren't causing very much disruption. I'm sure that the union would contest that. Universities UK, which represents about 140 institutions, has accused the union of being fixated or having an ideological fixation with strikes. And on the pensions issue, it says the settlement that's been imposed already is at the very limit of affordability. The Universities and Colleges Employers Association says it's determined to protect students who might be affected by this, and it says it's dismayed at the prospect of further strike action. Now, we filmed at Newcastle University for part of that piece you saw there, and it says it's making every effort to minimise disruption.
Now, Fergus, given we talked about inflation, the cost of living, is this just the start of a series of strikes across whole sectors and industrial disputes over pay?
Well, of course, inflation hit 6.2% this month, and it's predicted to reach at least 8%. Wage offers are coming in way under that in many places. Just this week, we had a big manufacturer in the northeast offer its staff 1.6%, and the unions there say they'll go on strike over pay because of that. As inflation and the cost of living increases, I think we can expect more industrial action over pay.
Fergus, thanks very much. Let's talk to our guests. Onwurah, students had a pretty tough time. Last thing they need is more disruption. Shouldn't the lecturers be prioritising students?
It's absolutely true that students these last 2-3 years have had a really disrupted time with COVID. And it's worth noting also that one of the biggest changes that the Chancellor didn't talk about was the changes to the way in which student debts are repaid, which means that they're paying back more. So they absolutely need to have.
Should then the lecturers be prioritising them rather than taking their strike action?
I would say, that you cannot get a good education unless the lecturers and the researchers are well paid, properly paid, and that I have been surprised and indeed shocked by the level of transient work, the level of insecurity that we have in some of our great universities, the way in which researchers and junior lecturers are exploited. So, I understand the issues that
the Newcastle University needs to get their act together then.
I think we need to have more career security for researchers and lecturers, because and it also particularly impacts those who are women, those who don't have rich parents or the bank of mum and dad, in terms of the way, and that's one of the reasons why the science and the research community is so undiverse. So yes, I agree. I think the universities and the employers need to sort this out, but also we don't want to see students having their studies so impacted.
Robert Goodwill, are universities or unions wrong here or both?
Well, I just think it's so sad. Students have had 2 very torrid years, as Chi said, and I think they should get round the table and sort it out. The pensions regulator, I think, have looked at this and given their view. I think it might help if the vice-chancellors of universities around the country didn't give themselves such big pay packets. But I think they should get around. I mean, it really is, kicking somebody when they're down, when students who have, really had a tough couple of years, and now they're having disruption to their lectures, which they're paying for. And I think that's the point made. They say, we're paying £9,000 and we need.
Doesn't government bear some responsibility for this, though? Because the government opened up, at the university's request, admittedly, to more and more students in these universities. That's what's adding to the workload pressures on lecturers.
Well, I don't think they're talking about workload. They're talking about the percentage increase they might want.
No, I think
I think it's important that they, strike action should be the last resort. And in this particular situation, the way it affects students and their futures and what they're learning, what their degrees they're going to get, I think they should really think again about strike action.
I just want to widen it just slightly from the university sector. Should workers be all asking for a pay rise to match inflation? Can public sector and industry afford that?
As I said, working people have not had a pay rise since 2008. Their wages are not back to where they are, and so there's no sort of flesh to cut, if you like. And now inflation is spiralling. So I do think it's important that wages reflect the cost of living and also the sort of the wealth creation and generation. Okay. I'm not going to say what the pay rise for every sector should be. That's not my position. But I do think it's important that workers are properly paid.
But should people be having inflation pay rises?
Well, I mean, companies can only pay the pay rise that they can afford to pay and remain.
They can always afford to pay their shareholders.
Well, I mean, often shareholders, a lot of companies have not been giving dividends because they've had a tough time during the pandemic.
The oil companies are buying their own shares. They've got so much money.
We'll have to leave it there.